In autumn of 1773, flyers and pamphlets began showing up on doors and on trees, and they were signed by this enigmatic man called Rusticus, whose true identity has since been lost to history. The flyers read, "Make sure that your watchmen be instructed as they go on their rounds to call out every night 12:30, beware the East India Company." Since earlier that year, the world's largest multinational conglomerate, the East India Company, or the EIC, had been undercutting the prices of their competitors, those competitors primarily being smugglers like John Hancock and Sam Adams. Now, the colonists had gotten wind of this and they boycotted the EIC in support of their colonial entrepreneurs, and the EIC became enraged. And in retaliation, what were just a few ships that they'd sent became this enormous burden, and they transported immense quantities of tea, and they tied up the harbor. The colonists, who were already upset, they became furious. Now, conventional history regarding the Boston Tea Party tells you that the colonists were provoked by the 1773 Tea Act, in which Parliament commanded a modest tax hike and demanded that it be paid in order to settle England's war debt. And, that's part of it, but not nearly to the extent of what the Tea Act and King George actually did. In reality, the Townshend Acts of 1767 had levied a 3 pence per 16-ounce tax on tea. So what does that mean? Well, let's do some redcoat math. 1 pound equals 20 shillings, and 1 shilling equals 12 pence. So if 16 ounces of tea was priced at 0.11 pound, then that would equal about 2 shillings. So the 3 pence tax wholesale added to the 25% item. To further put this number into perspective, the average tax burden per American household today with sales tax is about 25%. So while the colonists could have just stopped drinking tea to avoid that tax, Americans today do not have the choice to escape that burden. However, this backroom deal gets worse for the colonists. So from here on out, it actually becomes a little more relatable to you and I. Enshrined in the Tea Act was the East India Company's petition to the king to suppress the duty of the tea to the colonies, which granted the EIC both an absolute monopoly on the tea trade and the largest tax cut in the history of the world. They were also fully reimbursed by the crown, or the taxpayers, for all lost or unsold product, which amounted to billions in today's money. So to recap, England wasn't paying their war debt. The EIC wasn't paying any duties on the tea that was sent to the colonies. The EIC was being reimbursed for all lost product while having a monopoly, and the colonists were picking up the tab for all of it. And this upset the entrepreneurs because not only was the crown hurting them via taxation without representation, but the EIC was able to undercut them due to the royal cronyism, which was harming their businesses. On the day of the Boston Tea Party, one of the largest public meetings in Boston convened at the Old South Meeting House with as many as 5,000 colonists spilling into the streets. There were speeches that day by Sam Adams and John Hancock and Dr. Joseph Warren and other Boston Whig leaders, and they called to return the tea to England. Later that evening, though, word came at the last minute with a plea to Governor Hutchinson to let the ships return, and it was refused. Sam Adams announced publicly, this meeting can do nothing further to save the country. And chants of "Make Boston a Teapot Tonight" rang out through the streets. So how do I know all this? Well, the answer, my friends, is not taught to you in school. It can only be found in one place, a book. And this book is one of America's earliest textbooks. It's titled Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party, with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes, who is the survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. I'm not kidding. That's the name of the book. It's very long. And this memoir is the only firsthand account that we have of what happened that night. And it's a national treasure. So very few records of exactly who Hughes was survived the last 250 years. We know that he was a friend of Paul Revere and a confidant of George Washington, who once remarked in a letter that Hughes was, quote, an incredibly good-natured young man. We also know that while Thomas Jefferson often referred to the Boston Tea Party as the incident down at Boston Harbor, it was actually Hughes who coined the term the Boston Tea Party. I could give you a rundown in my own words of what happened the night the little band of patriots drowned the tea in Boston Harbor, but the fact that we have firsthand, unadulterated account by a participant is something we cannot and should not ever take for granted. So I'm going to read it to you in George R.T. Hughes' own words, the story of what happened that night, today in history, December 16th, 1773, down at Boston Harbor, when Hughes was just 17 years old. From the memoir of George R.T. Hughes. It was now evening, and I immediately dressed myself in the costume of an Indian, equipped with a small hatchet I and my associates denominated the tomahawk, with which, and a club, after having painted my face and hands with coal dust in the shop of a blacksmith, I repaired to Griffin's Wharf, where the ships lay that contained the tea. When I first appeared in the street, after thus being disguised, I fell in with many who were dressed, equipped, and painted as I was, and who fell in with me, and marched in order to the place of our destination. When we arrived at the wharf, there were 3 of our number who assumed an authority to direct our operations, to which we readily submitted. They divided us into 3 parties for the purpose of boarding the 3 ships, which contained the tea, at the same time. The name of him who commanded the division to which I was assigned was Leonard Pitt. The names of the other commanders I never knew. We were immediately ordered by the respective commanders to board the ships at the same time, which we promptly obeyed. The commander of the division to which I belonged, as soon as we were on board the ship, appointed me boatswain and ordered me to go to the captain and demand of him the keys to the hatches and a dozen candles. I made the demand accordingly, and the captain promptly replied and delivered the articles, but requested me at the same time to do no damage to the ship or rigging. We then were ordered by our commander to open the hatches and take all of the chests of tea and throw them overboard, and we immediately proceeded to execute his orders, first cutting and splitting the chests with our tomahawks, so as thoroughly to expose them to the effects of the water. In about 3 hours from the time we went on board, we had thus broken and thrown overboard every tea chest to be found in the ship, while those on other ships were disposing of the tea at the same time. We were surrounded by British armed ships, but no attempt was made to resist us. We then quietly retired to our several places of residence without having any conversation with each other or taking any measures to discover who were our associates, nor do I recollect of our having had the knowledge of the name of a single individual concerned in the affair, except that of Leonard Pitt, the commander of my division, who I have mentioned. There appeared to be an understanding that each individual should volunteer his services, keep his own secret, and request the consequences for himself. No disorder took place during the transaction, and it was observed at that time that the stillest night ensued that Boston had enjoyed for many months. It's amazing that we have that. 342 chests of tea carried out by the East India Company weighing over 92,000 pounds, roughly 46 tons, and worth $1.7 million in today's money was thrown overboard. The Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor. These chests were smashed open by the Sons of Liberty and their affiliates, armed with an assortment of axes, and dumped into Boston Harbor the night of December 16th, 1773. Of the 342 chests of tea, we know that 240 chests were documented as black and green teas from China, including Bohea, Congo, Souchong, Singlo, and Hyson. It was low tide at the time, so the tea was piling up in the harbor. Young colonial boys were sent into the water to stomp down on the tea so it would all spoil, which it did. None of the 46 tons of tea could be saved. These men and a handful of women all abided by a strict code of silence that lasted 50 years. Not a soul involved violated that code. Many even took their own participation to their graves, even after it was safe to talk about. There are 116 known participants of the Boston Tea Party, but the number is thought to be closer to 150 or 200. These colonists didn't do it for glory. They did it because tyranny's wrong. John Adams' diary from December 17th, 1773 reads in part, "Last night, 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in the last effort of the patriots that I greatly admire. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible, and it must have so important consequences and so lasting that I cannot but consider it to be an epocha of history." Happy Boston Tea Party Day, everybody. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and stay free.